The accusative is a grammatical case that marks the direct object of a verb. The direct object is a word or phrase that receives the action of a verb. Some languages put a special marker on the word to indicate that it's the direct object. In the sentence, David hit Goliath, Goliath is the direct object. He is the one directly affected by the action of the verb, hit. If I were to write this sentence in Greek, then the word Goliath would be in the accusative case. It would have an accusative case marker. Modern English does not have an accusative case marker. Instead, the direct object is indicated primarily by word order. It usually follows the verb. Listen to these two sentences. God loves the world. In this sentence, world is the direct object of the verb love. World receives the action of the verb. Here's the next sentence. The world loves God. Here, God is the direct object of the verb love. God receives the action of the verb. Notice that in both sentences, the form of the word didn't change whether it was the subject of the verb or the direct object of the verb. Koine Greek has an accusative case marker, and it can indicate the direct object, among other things. The accusative case is important for Bible study because it helps complete the idea of the verb. If I were to say, for God so loved, and stop there, you might ask, so loved what? The word in the accusative case answers that question. God so loved the world. English Bible translations will seldom supply key words for the accusative case. Verbs that take a direct object are called transitive verbs. Verbs that do not take a direct object are called intransitive verbs. When used with a transitive verb, the accusative has an adverbial nature. It limits or defines the action of the verb. The most general function of the accusative case is to indicate the direct object of a verb. Acts 16:32 reads, "And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house." I have highlighted by selection this English verb, spoke, which corresponds to elaleson in the Greek. And this noun phrase, the word, is highlighted because the underlying Greek, ton logon, is in the accusative case. Here we have the article accusative, singular masculine, and noun accusative, singular masculine. In this sentence, these words in the accusative case function as the direct object of the Greek verb. And in that function, they help complete the idea. So Paul didn't just say anything to the jailer, he spoke the word of the Lord to him. Now another way to see if the word in the accusative case is an object of the verb is to go over to the exegetical guide on Acts 16:32, under Visualizations, click Cascadia Syntax Graphs of the New Testament. And here in this resource we have a graphical display of the text, and they spoke to him the message, and here is our word in the accusative case. We can hover over it and get the morphological information, and we see that this is connected to an O. And we can see here that the entire phrase, the message of the Lord, functions as the object within this clause. Luke 15:11 and 12 read, "And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them." In verse 12, we have a couple words highlighted here for us because the underlying Greek words are in the accusative case. These words indicate what was given and what was divided. Here, the share is what was given. And in this sentence, the property is what is divided. You can see how these words here complete the idea of the verb. Now, the accusative, when it functions as the direct object, isn't the cause of a lot of interpretational difficulties. But that doesn't mean that you want to bypass it as you read and as you study. But looking at the direct object might lead you to ask some other interesting questions like, when would a son normally get a share of their father's wealth? And now if you were to look at a commentary, you'd find that the division of inheritance actually took place usually upon the death of the father. So this request was almost the equivalent of saying, "Father, I wish you were dead." Sometimes certain verbs need two objects in the accusative case to complete the idea of the verb. This is called a double accusative. The most common constructions involve verbs of speaking, dressing, thinking, and giving. Mark 6:34 reads, "When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things." We can see that we have quite a few words highlighted in English for us, because the underlying Greek words are in the accusative case. For our example, we just want to look at the last two words here. Autos, which is translated them, and pala, which is translated many things. And equally important to our example here is the verb to teach, or in Greek, didaskein. And as I said, this use of the accusative involves verbs of speaking. And we can see the Lounaida number down here. Go ahead and click on this link. And just at a glance here, you can see that didasko, the lemma form of didaskein, belongs to domain 33, which is marked communication. So we have our verb of speaking here, and we also have our words in the accusative case, autos and pala. But over here we can also see that we have two words highlighted because the Greek words they're tied to are in the accusative case. But in this instance, the word great tells us something more about the word crowd. It describes the size of the crowd. Over here, them doesn't describe something more about many. Them is the object of the word teach. Or as we have in Greek, autos is the object of didaskein. But since it's a verb of communication, it also takes a second object, and that's where pala comes in, which is translated many things. Now you'll notice that this kind of information isn't captured in the reverse interlinear pane. What we have here on the morph line only refers to the forms or form of the words. It doesn't tell us anything about the function, what this word is doing in the sentence or clause. For that, we need to go up to the Cascadia syntax graphs, and here's our final clause that we've been looking at. He began to teach them many, and things would be supplied here in English. Now notice how this is annotated within this clause. We have our verb here, didaskein. Then we have our object, the first object, autos, which is translated them, signified by the O here. And then we have an O2 for the second object, which is pala, translated many. Now if you are working just with Greek, you might see these two words in the accusative case and wonder which one goes with the verb here. And that's where the annotations for the syntax graph come in handy, because they show you the function of the word and not just the form. It shows you the task that each word is performing. Philippians 3:7 in the ESV reads, "But whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ." Right away you might think that perhaps the words loss in English and the words Christ function as the objects, since they're both highlighted in red. Now remember, the words in the accusative case need to be related to the verb. The phrase ton Christon, this noun phrase, is actually tied to this preposition, dia, which forms a prepositional phrase, which is unrelated to the verb hegemai, which is translated counted. And so it seems as though we're missing a word in the accusative case. Now take a look at the surface line here in the reverse interlinear pane. Any guesses? If you thought it was this one, you're right. Tauta, which doesn't get translated into the ESV, but could be translated into English as these things. Now the translators probably considered this to be a little redundant, and so they didn't translate it literally. But this word tauta, which is in the accusative case, along with zemion, which is translated loss, and also in the accusative case, work together to form the double accusative of this Greek verb, hegemai, which is translated in the ESV counted. And this verb would be considered a verb of thinking. If we go down here to the Louw-Nida number and open up the Louw-Nida lexicon, we can see that this Greek verb belongs to the domain number 31, which is hold of you, believe, trust. And so we have a list of domains here that relate to verbs of thinking. Now back up here at the reverse interlinear pane, the line morph will tell you about the form of the word, what part of speech it is, its case and number and gender. But it doesn't tell you the function of the word. If you want to get to the function, what it's doing in a sentence or clause, you want to look at the Cascadia syntax graphs. And you can see that within this clause, there are two objects. The first object here, which is translated literally, these, tauta, in the accusative case, along with the second object of the verb, zemion, which is translated loss. Now, it's doubtful that you'll ever use the phrase double accusative in a sermon, and I'd encourage you not to. But I'm showing you these examples so that you can see the range of uses that the accusative case can have, so that you can avoid misunderstandings and avoid oversimplifications as you learn to use Greek in your study. A word in the accusative case which stands in place of a noun can function as the subject of an infinitive verb. This is called an accusative subject of the infinitive. In a sentence like, I want you to know, you is the direct object of the verb want, and at the same time, it's the subject of the verb to know. If I were to write this sentence in Greek, you would be in the accusative, and the verb to know would be an infinitive. Colossians 2:1 reads, For I want you to know how great a struggle I have for you, and for those at Laodicea, and for all who have not seen me face to face. The beginning of this sentence is just like the one that I used in my example. Let's look at the reverse interlinear pane. Here are my two verbs. The first one, thelo, which is translated in the ESV want, and eidenai, which is translated in the ESV to know. And here we have humas, which is in the accusative case, translated you, functioning both as the object of the verb want, but also functioning as the subject of the verb to know. Remember that the morphology line here in the reverse interlinear pane is only going to inform us as to the form of the word. If we want to look at the function, we need to look at one of the databases or graphs dealing with syntax. And here's the verse we're looking at. I want you to know. Here we have our two verbs, thelo and eidenai, with humas translated you in the accusative case. Now notice when I hover over this word, a section of the graph is highlighted. And here in the graph, you can see the dual function of that word, humas, translated you, functioning as both the subject within this clause, as the subject of the verb, but also, one level up, it functions as the object at the same time. And so within this clause, it functions as the object, and within this clause, it functions as a subject. And you can also find similar information as to the function of words in another resource called the Lexem Syntactic Greek New Testament, Expansions and Annotations. Or you can just type in SGNT notes into the command bar to open it. The reason why I'm showing you these examples is because as you use Greek tools in Logos, you may come across data that seems to contradict itself. So for example, hovering over the definition of accusative, the case that normally marks the direct object of a verb, or the object of some prepositions. And now normally there is the key word in the definition, because if you notice, the syntactic force or function of the word in the clause is actually subject, not object. And so you might say, hey, well this doesn't make sense. How can it be the subject, but then it says it's the object here? Well, that's because when you have an infinitival clause, that is, a clause that contains an infinitive verb, the word that's in the accusative case can function as a subject. If you're looking to mix things up in your next small group Bible study, you might want to try a Bible swap. If there are different translations represented in your group, swap Bibles so that no one is reading from a translation that they're already familiar with. Things may get very interesting when you can read together from different translations. Take, for example, the difference between the English Standard Version and the New Revised Standard Version in Philippians 1:7.
In the ESV, Paul is the subject of the verb, and the Philippians are the object. Because I, Paul, hold you, Philippians, in my heart. But in the NRSV, it's just the opposite. Because you, the Philippians, hold me, Paul, in your heart. So how would you account for the differences between these two translations? Well, it has to do with the accusative subject of the infinitive. Let me close the New Revised Standard Version and just focus on the English Standard Version. Now here we have our first word in the accusative case. We can see by the morph line down here, me, which is translated I in the ESV, followed by our infinitive verb, echein, which is translated hold, and the next word in the accusative case, which is humas, translated you. Now here's where the issue is. Since we have two words in the accusative case, and the infinitive can take an accusative as its subject, which one is the subject and which one is the object? And now I want to show you how you can begin to dialogue with commentaries. There's some discussion about the different translations of this verse. And the commentator notes, the Greek could read, you have me in your heart, which is what we saw in the NRSV. And it even notes that the context could support that interpretation. But the commentator also notes that on the other hand, the construction more naturally reads, I have you in my heart. And you notice there's some footnotes, and these footnotes typically refer to technical discussion or citations to other works. And here this footnote tells us what I described to you earlier, that here we have an infinitive construction in Greek with those two accusatives, me, which is translated I in the ESV, and humas, which is translated you in the ESV as well. And the next footnote describes the grammatical rule for determining which one is the subject and which one is the object. So the reading that we have in the ESV, I have you in my heart, follows the rule of thumb in such constructions that the accusative nearest the verb is the subject. So now if we go back up to our reverse interlinear pane, the accusative nearest the verb is the subject. Now notice in the manuscript line here, we have these numbers, and the numbers indicate the order in which these words appear in the Greek manuscript, or in the Greek New Testament. Here we have 11, 12, ta, echein, and notice which word in the accusative comes next. Me, which is translated I, functioning as the subject, with 14, 15, 16, and then you finally get to 17, humas, which is translated you, as the object. So now you can see the why and the how behind the ESV's decision to make this accusative the subject and this other word in the accusative case the object. So learning terminology like accusative help us to interact with the information that's found in commentaries. Now you want to make sure that as you look at the details of grammar, you don't miss the big picture. The big picture is that Paul and the Philippians had such an affection for each other that it caused Paul, even in the midst of difficult times, to be thankful.
An accusative in simple apposition is a construction that involves two substantives in the accusative case positioned next to each other, which refers to the same person, place, or thing.
There are quite a few words highlighted here because the underlying Greek words are in the accusative case. We're not going to look at all of them, just the ones that follow the name Epaphroditus. Now earlier you learned that the accusative case normally marks a word that functions as the direct object of a verb. But in this episode we're looking at the range of uses of the accusative, and you can see if you applied that basic sort of definition to this sentence, it wouldn't quite make sense. We don't have separate direct objects here. We have words that all refer back to the same person, Epaphroditus. This verse is an illustration of the accusative used in simple apposition. That is, words in the accusative case placed next to each other that refer to the same person, place, or thing. In the reverse interlinear pane, on the morph line, you can see information about the form of the word. But you won't see information about the function of the word in a sentence or clause. For that, you need to look at a resource or resources that deal with syntax. You can see that each of the words that were marked as being in the accusative case, adelphan, brother, sunergan, fellow worker, sustratiotein, fellow soldier, and so on, are not marked as separate objects within the syntax graph, even though they're in the accusative case. Instead, they're all linked together as one object. If each of these words in the accusative case functioned separately as objects, you would see this O here, down here, and here for each one of the words in the accusative case. Let's take a look at another resource that describes the function of words. The Lexem, Syntactic Greek New Testament, Expansions and Annotations. Here we have one of the words in the accusative case, epaphroditon, translated Epaphroditus, in the accusative case. And if we hover over that, we get a definition, a case that normally marks the direct object of a verb. And we can see that that definition matches the syntactic force labeled here, direct object. But now what about the other words that were also highlighted because they were in the accusative case? Let's take a look. Adelphan, also in the accusative case, and notice the syntactic force. It isn't direct object, but a positive or appositional. That is, an accusative in simple apposition. And notice the definition here, a word used to clarify or add to the meaning or significance of another word or clause. This is sometimes called epexegesis. And so can you imagine what the other ones are labeled in terms of syntactic force? Sunergan, accusative, but in terms of function, appositive or appositional. Sustratiotein, accusative, but also functioning as appositive or appositional. Apostolon, also accusative, also appositional. And leitorgon, accusative and also appositional. So you'll want to understand that while each case has a most common use, they also have a range of uses. So that if you were to go back to something like the ESV with visual filters, you would want to understand that you can apply that general definition to each one of the instances here. Why would Paul describe Epaphroditus in this way? He was already known by the Philippians. It seems as though Paul's added all this extra information about Epaphroditus because he wants the Philippians to view him a certain way, as someone whose life is worth imitating. 1 John 2:1 reads, "My little children, I am writing these things to you so that you may not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous." In this verse, John explains the purpose of his letter writing, so that you may not sin. And while he acknowledges the frailty of the believer, he also acknowledges the faithfulness of Jesus Christ. And here we have several words highlighted because the underlying Greek words are in the accusative case. Now it wouldn't make sense, especially having read this in English, for each one of these highlighted words to function as a direct object. You can tell, even in English, that these words have a different function. This is an illustration of the accusative used in simple apposition. Let's look at some of the Greek words in the reverse interlinear pane. The first word in the accusative case is parakleton, which is translated advocate. The next one that you'll see that's in the accusative case is patera, also in the accusative case, translated father. This group of words here is a prepositional phrase. Pros is the preposition, translated with, and these three words function as one unit, so we won't be looking particularly at this word in the accusative case. But the others we will want to look at. Next we have, and in this order, Iesun, Christon, and Dikaion. Now we don't want to just look at the form of these words, we want to look at their function. And in order to look at their function, we need to look at the syntactical resources within Logos. The first one we want to look at is the Cascadia syntax graphs for the New Testament. And we can see that parakleton, which is translated an advocate, is labeled O for being the object of the clause. Now remember how I said that patera, which is translated father, isn't being used in simple apposition? That's because it's working together with this preposition here. Pros, which is translated with, can take its object, in this case, ton patera, in the accusative case. And if you didn't catch all that, we'll go over those kinds of concepts more in the prepositions section. You can see that the graph has pros ton patera with the father separate from the object of the clause. The prepositional phrase has an adverbial function. That means it tells us a little something more about the verb echamen, we have. So where do we have an advocate? We have an advocate with the father. Now notice that the annotation here for object function includes Iesun Christon Dikaion, Jesus Christ the righteous. Notice that it doesn't list Iesun and Christon and Dikaion as separate direct objects within the clause. Instead, these words in the accusative case are in simple apposition, further describing the noun parakleton, which is translated advocate. For another way of looking at this, let's look at the Lexem Syntactic Greek New Testament, expansions and annotations. And here we can see that parakleton, which is translated advocate, is in the accusative case, but its syntactic force, its function within the clause, is that of the direct object. Let's scroll down and look at the other words in the accusative case. Now remember what I said about patera, which is translated father? It's in the accusative case, but notice its syntactic force. It's not functioning as the direct object, nor is it in simple apposition. Instead, it's a part of a prepositional phrase. Let's take a look at the next couple words. And Iesun, which is translated Jesus, is in the accusative case, and the syntactic force of this word is appositive or appositional, a word used to clarify or add to the meaning or significance of another word or clause. This is sometimes called epexegesis. And you'll see that the next two words, Christon, translated Christ, is both labeled appositive or appositional for syntactic force, and Dikaion is also labeled appositive or appositional. Now it's important that after looking at all this detailed information, to take a step back and look at the big picture. These words in the accusative case aren't separate direct objects. They're accusatives used in simple apposition, giving further description to this word here, advocate. And this advocate isn't on earth, he's with the Father. And it isn't just anyone like an angel. This advocate is Jesus Christ, one who lived their life here on earth. And this advocate is not unrighteous like a sinner. In contrast, he is righteous and able to help us in our time of need.
A word in the accusative case can indicate the extent of an action. When that word deals with time, it can answer the question, how long? This is labeled an accusative of time. When that word deals with space, it can answer questions like, how long, how much, or how big. This is labeled an accusative of space. English Bible translations may supply the word for.
Matthew 28:20 reads, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. In this commission, Jesus' command to make disciples is nested between two realities, that all authority has been given to him, and that he will be with his disciples always. Now, in this verse, we have several words highlighted because the underlying Greek word is in the accusative case. And the word we want to focus in on is this English word, always, and the three Greek words underneath it, passos, tas, hemeros. Notice that there are three Greek words here for this one English word. If I were to translate the Greek in a very literal fashion, it would read, all the days. Notice how the English word always is italicized in the surface line. That means that the underlying Greek, these three words here, are an idiom. An idiom is an expression that can't be understood from its grammatical parts because it has a meaning all its own. And that's why it's not just translated literally all the days. Now we just want to focus in on one of the words here, hemeros, and notice two things about it. The first is that it's in the accusative case. The next thing we want to look at is the domain that it belongs to, since we don't have a translation above here to work from. Going down to the Launite number, let's click here. And now notice the domain that this word belongs to. Domain 67, which is domain of time. And so that's how we get the label or category, accusative of time. Going back up to the reverse interlinear pane, an accusative used in this way is answering the question, how long? It's talking about the extent of time that an action will take place. Because it tells us how long an action will take place, that means it's telling us more information about a verb. That is, it's functioning adverbially. Let's take a look at the Cascadia syntax graphs. And here's the phrase we were looking at earlier. Passas, tas, hemeros, which is translated all the days, literally here. And notice the labeling, that these words have an adverbial function. They represent the when, where, how, or why of a proposition. And in this verse, the proposition is, I am with you. How long will Jesus be with us? The answer would be, always. Now let's take a look at the word in the Lexem Syntactic Greek New Testament, expansions and annotations. And here we have hemeros, which is translated day, the Launite number here with domain number 67. In form, or in case, it's accusative. And here we have the syntactic force, temporal accusative, which is just another way of saying accusative of time. A word in the accusative which is used to show a temporal element in the present clause. So now let's zoom back out here. After looking at all this grammatical information, hemeros in the accusative case doesn't indicate the object of the sentence. Instead, it works to show us how long the action of the verb will last. How long will Jesus be with us? Always. This truth, that His presence is with us, is foundational to living out His mission and His message here on earth. Luke 24:13 reads, That very day 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. Now this verse is part of a larger section, Luke 24:1-53, where Jesus appears to 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus after His resurrection. There are 2 words highlighted here because their underlying Greek words are in the accusative case, and neither of these words are functioning as the direct object in this verse. The first one, komein, which is translated village, is in the accusative case, but it's part of this prepositional phrase here. We have eis, which is translated to, which is the preposition. These words together work as one unit. The next word in the accusative case, stadios, which is translated into this phrase, about 7 miles, is in the accusative case, but it's not functioning as a direct object either. And we can tell from the English translation that it's indicating how far or long something is from something else. In this case, how far Emmaus is from Jerusalem. Grammarians label this use of the accusative of space, because the word here is in the accusative case. And if we looked at the semantic domain of the word by clicking on the Launite number here, we would see that the Greek word here, stadios, belongs to semantic domain number 81, spatial dimensions. Going back up to the reverse interlinear pane, the important point to remember about the accusative when it's used with space or time is that it refers to the extent of space or time.
Certain prepositions take their objects in the accusative case. Don't try to determine the function of the preposition by the case alone. Look at the context and consult your interlinear's Launite numbers to help you determine the sense.
2 Timothy 3:16 reads, All Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. Now back at verse 16, we want to look at how these words, which are highlighted because the underlying Greek words are in the accusative case, are working together with the prepositions. Now I want to take a closer look at this preposition, pros, which is translated for in the ESV. I'm going to go down here to the Launida line and hover over the number, and you can see that this preposition functions as a marker of purpose, pointing to the goal of an event or state, and it can be translated for the purpose of, for the sake of, or in order to. Now let's open this lexicon, and in this menu, let's select Send Hyperlinks here. Now double-click on the preposition pros here, and you can see the range of meanings that this preposition can have. It can indicate extension, location, content, association, and here we find the use in our verse, purpose. With so many options, how do we know that this meaning here is the one that fits our verse? It really comes down to one thing, context, to the words that the preposition is in relationship with. The words here that are highlighted are all nouns, but these nouns actually can represent events. That is, they represent verbal actions. What I mean by that is that each noun can be converted into a verb. For example, teaching can be I teach. Reproof can be I reprove. Correct can be I correct. And training can be I train. Now I make mention of these nouns representing verbal actions or events because of what the entry says in the Launida lexicon. Going down here to the reverse interlinear pane, and remember what it said earlier, that pros can be used as a marker of purpose, pointing to the goal of an event or state. And the key word here is event. That even though the words like teaching and reproof and correction are all nouns, they can also represent events. But what if the word that the preposition was in relationship with was not a word that could represent an event? Let's go back and double-click on pros. And you see that pros can also indicate association, as in domain number 89112. Now notice that this same preposition, pros, when in relationship with another word that is actually a personal or relational agent, the function of the preposition changes to a marker of association that can be translated, instead of words like for, it can be translated with or before, as in we have peace with God, or the Word was with God. So that gives you an idea as to how prepositions can have a range of meanings.